hosted by you/Vittoria Vicei. Today, my boyfriend, Eric, 24M, and I, 24F, were invited to the wedding of one of his oldest friends from school. We received our save the date months ago, and the invite was addressed to Eric and Vicky. Our invite stated we were invited to the whole event, the service, the breakfast, and the evening reception. Our RSVP required both of our dietary requirements for the breakfast, which we replied to ages ago. I thought this was pretty awesome and generous of the bride and groom, as I had never met either of them and Eric was only close with the bride, so it felt like a very nice gesture. The wedding was a few hours away from where we live, and since neither of us drive, I booked train tickets in advance, which came to about £60 each for a return journey, and an Airbnb, which worked out at £90 between us. We don't earn a lot, so this was quite a big expense to justify. However, since they had invited us to the whole wedding, we thought it would be rude not to go. The bride also specified colors we should wear, so I bought a new outfit since I didn't have anything formal that would be suitable. Not the end of the world, but with Christmas coming up, it was a bit difficult, and I had to be really frugal throughout November to make it work. The total spend was probably double what I would typically spend monthly on fun stuff like going out for dinner or drinks or buying new clothes. We arrived at the service, and it was beautiful, the bride looked lovely, and it was very emotional. I get nervous at weddings, so I hadn't eaten beforehand, figuring the 4-course breakfast would fill me up nicely. After the ceremony, we went straight into the venue to have drinks and sit at the tables. We were towards the back of the line into the venue, so half the congregation had already sat down. We glanced at the seating plan, saw Eric's name, and headed over. There was no place setting for me. Eric found his name, but there weren't any free seats at the table. Eric sat down, and I asked an usher if there had been a mistake. He didn't know, so he waved over the bride. She and I had never met before, but she seemed friendly, until she opened her mouth. "Oh no, you're not part of the breakfast, the invitation was just for the reception and service. You're welcome to come back later." This was in front of most of the guests who had already sat down in a large venue, probably 140-ish seats. The usher suggested I go to the pub. Eric didn't know what to do but didn't want to cause a scene, so he stayed put and quiet. I quite literally have never felt so embarrassed and humiliated in my life. I left, and it was raining heavily. I hadn't brought an umbrella, since it was an indoor wedding, and being in a rural place, I had to walk about 20 minutes to get anywhere else. The usher had suggested a pub where the other guests are, so I just kept walking, but my shoes were ruined and soaked through. I was also pretty damn cold because it's December and I was dressed for a wedding. I got to the pub to find a handful of merrymakers drinking heavily, at 2 p.m., in wedding clothes. I introduced myself kind of awkwardly, as they were total strangers, but they were really nice. They invited me to sit with them and tell them about the service. All of them had only been invited to the reception. I asked one of them if I could see their invite, and it was crystal clear that they were evening guests. There was no mention of the service or the breakfast, nor their dietary requirements. Apparently, I was the only person who was invited and then uninvited to the whole event. I sat with them and had some food because I was starving, but they all started leaving to get ready at about 4 p.m. Since I was a total stranger, I didn't think it best to ask to come with them. Besides Eric, I didn't know anybody, and I had never been to this town before. Since being ejected at around 1:30 p.m., I was expected to hang around until 7:30 p.m. when the reception started. So I left. I felt so unwelcome and unwanted that I just wanted to go home. The evening event will start in about half an hour, without me, but I just can't bring myself to attend, knowing that half the guests watched me being asked to leave by the bride herself. I traded in my train ticket, which was a return for tomorrow, and now I'm traveling back alone. I texted Eric to tell him, but he didn't respond. I've been holding back tears since I was ejected, 6 hours ago, and I feel completely torn. I don't understand what happened with the invite, whether it was a mistake or whether I was just supposed to know that it was only for Eric, despite being addressed to both of us, despite asking for both of our dietary requirements, and despite explicitly stating we were invited to the whole wedding. Part of me feels like I should have gone to the evening reception too, but I'm soaked through. My hair and makeup look awful, my shoes are unwearable, I am barefoot on a really gross floor right now, and I'm freezing. I look a mess, and I feel so stupid. Did I mess up here? I feel like I've been totally messed over, and I'm really upset that Eric didn't stand up for me, say anything, or leave the breakfast with me, although I think that's less out of malice and more because he's just a bit hopeless when put on the spot. I've never heard of a wedding where you invite A+1 by name but then don't invite them to the same parts of the wedding as the other half of the couple. Nobody else at the wedding had this happen. I don't see how it can be personal, as I've never met any of them before. I'm really upset and can't wrap my head around how weird today has been. If this happened to you, what would you do? Edit. So this blew up way more than I expected. Thank you, everyone, for your words of support. It's really helped, and I've gone from a wobbly wet mess to a cackling harpy with my big glass of wine. You guys don't hold back on your opinions, and I kind of love it. It's now nearly bedtime here. Eric stayed at the party and presumably is still there. I came home and feel a lot better for knowing how crappy a situation this was. Karma's a B word, and when they go low, we go high, so I'm going to go to bed, sleep on it, and think about next steps in the morning. A lot of people think I should dump Eric. That had never crossed my mind. I was mostly pissed off with the bride and the maid of honor, who may have been involved too, I don't know. Eric will be coming home sometime tomorrow, and we're going to talk. I want to hear his piece because he's been drinking since lunchtime. He might just be a dum-dum rather than a full-blown jerk. Either way, no wine-fueled sudden decisions right now. I will try to come back and update as and when anything else happens. Thanks, everyone. Update 10 days later. I hadn't expected such a big reaction to my first post, and I just want to say thank you to everyone who gave advice and was supportive. I was feeling really down when I initially posted, but after an hour of drinking wine and reading your comments, I felt a lot more sane and calm. I wanted to clarify a few things that people were confused about or that weren't clear in my first post. I'm in the UK, and our weddings are different from how weddings are held in the US. Traditionally, there is a ceremony, the wedding breakfast, which is a sit-down 3-course meal. Although it's called breakfast, it usually takes place in the afternoon, followed by speeches, and then an evening reception, which is like a disco. It's not uncommon for people to invite only relatives and close friends to the ceremony and breakfast, then invite lots of evening guests for the reception. However, it is uncommon to invite someone to the ceremony and reception but not the breakfast, as that would leave them to entertain themselves for 6 hours. Having talked to friends and coworkers since last weekend, I learned that what happened to me was a serious no-no in terms of etiquette. Eric and I have been together for nearly a year and a half, we live together, and we have a pretty strong relationship. He had no past romantic connections with the bride, I'll call her Marie, which some people were asking about. They went to school together from the ages of 4 to 10 and remained in touch as pen pals/Facebook friends since then. They rarely see each other in person, and the wedding was the first time he had seen her in about 2 years. There was zero phone signal at the venue. We noticed this when we arrived for the ceremony and were a little annoyed because the wedding had a hashtag we couldn't exactly tweet about with no signal. This becomes important later. We didn't know until we arrived at the wedding that the maid of honor, Helen, was Eric's ex-girlfriend. They were together for 3 years, and she cheated on him and dumped him. They have a lot of bad blood and did not have any contact with each other. Okay, on to the update. After leaving the ceremony, I got straight on the train and went back to my hometown. I was on the train when I wrote my first post. When I got home, I told my parents everything, and they weren't particularly impressed. Like most of the posters here, they were perplexed that Eric hadn't come with me. My mom gave me a big hug, ran me a bath, poured me a glass of wine, and I just tried to relax and forget about my day from hell. I still hadn't heard from Eric, but I texted him to let him know I was home safe and would see him tomorrow. Eric texted me back at about 9 p.m., asking me what I meant by home or the Airbnb we had booked near the venue. I clarified, and he said, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. Love you so much, X. I didn't really know what to make of it since the whole day had just been such a massive mess, so I finished my wine, watched a Disney movie, and went to bed. The next morning, since I still hadn't really heard from Eric, I assumed he would be getting in around midday, so I got up early and started wrapping Christmas presents. At 8 a.m., I heard a key in the door and, lo and behold, it was Eric, still in his creased suit, with red eyes and looking like death. He wasn't really making sense, so I made him have a shower and warm up, made coffee, and decided to talk once he was looking human again. We sat down together and pieced together his side of the story. Basically, once I had left, Eric was absolutely livid with Marie. He had frozen like a deer in headlights when she asked me to leave and was kicking himself for not doing the right thing. About 10 minutes after I left, Marie turned around and said, "Oh, actually, a few people haven't turned up. Get Vicky to come back, we have space for her now." Eric had tried to call me, but because there was no phone signal anywhere near the venue, he couldn't get through. Marie pretty much immediately said, "Oh well, never mind." She didn't want to be here anyway, which obviously was nonsense, and made Eric feel terrible. The meal was a very formal, sit-down affair, so he just grinned and bore it, assuming I would be coming back in the evening. Eric was the only person mentioned in the speeches, by Marie's father, who wasn't a family member, and apparently, it was clear to everyone how disappointed he was that I wasn't there to share it with him. When I texted him at about 6 p.m. to let him know I was going home, he never received it. He was only able to text me at 9 p.m. by hiking down the road for 5 minutes to find a signal. All the while, his ex Helen was being sickly sweet, asking where I was, why I didn't want to come and enjoy the party, if I was shy, and apparently with quite the evil glint in her eye, like she had gotten exactly what she wanted. Neither of us knew she was the maid of honor until we got there, and given their bad relationship, Eric was pretty pissed off that Marie had failed to mention she had such a prominent role in the wedding. Whether Helen was behind the seating error, I don't know, but if she was, then Marie was just as bad for enabling it to happen. So Eric stayed at the wedding, miserably, and went back to the Airbnb afterward, alone. He barely slept, feeling angry at Marie and Helen for messing with us and at himself for not sticking up for me, and he left at 4:30 a.m. to get the first train home, hence why he was back at our place so early. He wasn't really apologetic to me at all. He didn't seem to see how it had been terrible for me. He felt more like he had been insulted by the situation and let down by his oldest friend. He is cutting off Marie and doesn't want anything more to do with her. So, yeah, that was Eric's take on the whole thing. To be honest, I was pretty upset that, in all of this, he hadn't really considered how I felt or what it had been like for me, getting thrown out of the wedding. While what he had gone through was pretty awful, he had at least been warm, dry, and well-fed. The indignity of your girlfriend being removed from an event you're attending isn't really as bad as being the girlfriend, getting soaked in the rain, feeling humiliated, and all the rest. So we talked, and I laid out why I wasn't okay with what had happened and why his reaction wasn't okay. He can be a bit clueless sometimes, and this feels like one of those times. He didn't step up to the plate, he just let the world wash over him and acted as a bystander. I'm still hurt by his actions, and he still hasn't really apologized properly. I don't know if he understands that he did wrong too. But this isn't a deal breaker for me. It's a heavy straw on the camel's back, but the camel is still standing. We have a really lovely Christmas coming up, and after a long autumn of working hard, all I want is to go back to the happy place we were in before this mess. Honestly, I don't want to think about it. So, I know a lot of you guys are going to drag me over hot coals for this one, but we're still together. I'm not going to break up with him over this, but it's a big dark mark on his record. As far as I'm concerned, he needs to get a lot of extra credit to get a pass this year, to use a terrible analogy, and I expect him to step up and really try to do better from now on. It's not really an ultimatum, but I'm willing to put this behind us if he can prove to me that he's invested and trying harder in this relationship from now on. If he doesn't, then I won't be sticking around. I love him a lot, but he needs to have my back and be empathetic to what I'm going through. I'm sorry this wasn't the victorious breakup update so many of you wanted, but I want a nice, happy Christmas together. I'm not ruling out breaking up if things don't improve, but I want to give him another chance to prove this relationship is worth it. Editor's note. Ob made a post about a different relationship 3 years later, so it's safe to say that the relationship with Eric did not last.